we are here at Castle and Key.
As long as y'all don't like kill me on the pours, everybody can pour. Does that work? Oh! We got it.
So if you just push this wire, all the alarms go off.
Oh yeah.
Very tempting. Jill is a very lucky woman. I don't know what she did to deserve me. 100 years of fungus in this building. So much freaking history here. This afternoon, we are here at Castle and Key. First time here, first time in a lot of distilleries. A lot of y'all ask about, you know, what distillery tours you should do, where you should go when you're up here in bourbon country. And I don't really know because I've only been on a handful of them. Most of the time I'm up here, it's strictly business. But today, Castle and Key has got a ton of history. I'm really looking forward to this one. Hey, this is where I give you one of these?
Yes. What would
An
you like?
old-fashioned would be fine.
Old-fashioned?
Yes, ma'am. All right, a restoration rye old-fashioned. That's pretty good. Not the best old-fashioned I've ever had, but not always putting rye in mine either. What's your name?
Steven.
Steven? Nice to meet you, Steven. So here for your birthday?
Yeah.
So you just come here or just
No, we went
Kentucky
to,
in general?
Kentucky in general.
Yeah.
We went to Buffalo Trace earlier.
Nice, that's a good tour. Did you get a bottle of V.H. Taylor?
We did. We got two.
Can't beat that.
We're staying in Louisville, so we have Old Forester tomorrow, or Stetzel and Willer, and then Old Forester on Saturday.
Old Forester, you're doing the downtown experience?
We're staying above it, yeah.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm in
Let's go get a
the
drink.
same building. We'll have to get a drink. I'm down there, so.
Yeah, we have to run into you.
That's funny, we're running into you. I was watching some of your videos, I think yesterday.
All right, you got to tell that story again. I was missing it.
My brother went to a mud bog in South Georgia and met my fiance's cousin. We became friends, mutual friends on the internet. One day she was just asking me questions about where I'm from. She said, well, if you ever see a short girl walking around here, you know, whatever. And I said, well, how short are you? And she sent me a picture of my fiance and her sister. Her sister's 6'3", my fiance's 6 foot, my height. And then, you know, that other girl's like 5'4". But anyway, I said, that blonde haired girl's pretty. And I said, well, I'm gonna marry that girl one day. Probably about an hour later, messaged me and said, if you're gonna marry me, I need a proper proposal. So.
Did you propose right then and there?
No, it's
come on,
a little
chicken.
hard-headed. It took me a few years, but I finally got around to it. I don't deserve her. Every day I'm like, I don't know what I did to deserve this. But I mean,
On the other hand, Jill is a very lucky woman. I don't know what she did to deserve me. I don't know how long I hold that joke. Of course I'm joking. Lord have mercy.
How long have you and your wife been together?
Married 25 years, together for, I guess, 27 then?
High school sweethearts?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I met her in Spanish class.
are y'all from Opelika?
No, I grew up in a very small town, 200 people. So they decided for economic reasons to shut that school down and bus us 10 miles to the neighboring school. After 7th grade, they shut that school down and combined it with another small country school 10 miles the other direction from it. She went to that school.
Our story starts in 1887. Before that, E.H. Taylor did a little bit of touring in Europe. It's kind of where he fell in love for the architecture. So that's where we have kind of a Scottish style castle, the Roman style bathhouse. You know, he took inspiration from German beer gardens and said, why can't we bring that over here and do that with bourbon? Before he ever got into distilling, he was a banker. During those years as a banker, he would see these guys come in, and during that time, you know, he's cashing their checks. The distillers, they came in with all the big wallets, all that kind of thing. He'd go home and look at his paycheck and wonder what he was doing wrong. Like something's not right. They were making way more money than he ever could or was at the time. So he kind of dabbled his hands in other couple local distilleries, one of which was Oscar Pepper right down the street, now known as Woodford, and then the other one being OFC, which we know is Buffalo Trace, right? During that time, he kind of learned the do's, the don'ts, the things that worked and what didn't work. So he takes all that inspiration, breaks ground out here in 1887 and says, I'm gonna build a bourbon destination. It took about 13 years for everything to be through with all the construction and stuff like that. And at that time, once that happens, once after those 13 years, the playing field's set and everything's ready to go. This is one of my favorite spots though, truly because of the amount of history here on property. We know that Taylor was quite the host. Once he started construction here, he actually became mayor of Frankfurt at a little bit of time. He used his political influence to extend the rail line 7 miles from Frankfurt to his train station right across from the Spring House, humbly named Taylorton Station. We just added bar to the end of that, and now we serve cocktails out of it. So I think that's a pretty neat idea. So the reason I like to stop here is because this is that route that rail line took. This was the path that his guests took onto property. Think back in the time, you know, you would pass his warehouse, you'd pass his bottling hall, the sunken gardens, the castle, all of that sort of stuff. Eventually departing at Taylorton Station, you would step off, he'd hand you pints of his finest whiskey and say, hey, come join the party. He does all this all the way up until the ripe age of, you know, or year of 1920. We all know what happens in 1920, right? Prohibition, not fun. E.H. Taylor takes that as a sign that he should step back from his career, and he eventually retires to his cattle farm, which is now known as Ashford Stud. You can actually go visit them here in the area if you're ever looking for something else to do Taylor related. But he leaves the distillery in the hands of his children, and they try to keep it, maintain it. They just never could keep that same liveliness that he had. They eventually throw the rag in on the project, E.H. Taylor shortly after that passes the ripe age of 93. We gather from that though, if you want to live a nice long life like E.H. Taylor did, the key to that is
Drink a lot of whiskey.
TJ's immortal then.
Yeah.
oh yeah, he's got it forever.
I'm already pickled.
I turned myself into a pickle!
This property then gets taken over by National Distillers in 1935. They come out and they start doing tons and tons of expansion on the property. I mean, E.H. Taylor, when he was here, he was doing anywhere between 100, 200 barrels a day. National comes out and they start doing anywhere between 600 to 1,000. This is our cistern room. The pipeline here actually runs all the way from the stills and the castle straight to here. Roll these barrels right off here, fill them, and then they roll on the tracks down to the warehouse. They just expanded all that sort of thing all the way up until 1972. During that time, there was a shift in the industry. We like to call that the Bond effect here in the bourbon hospitality, because we all know James Bond, right? Shows up on the movie screen with a big bottle of Smirnoff vodka, and there's martinis that were shaken, not stirred. Those dark aged spirits sales start to plummet and clears start to rise. People are more interested in vodkas, gins, tequilas, that sort of thing. So during that time, National sees that as a threat. Come the summer of 1972, they leave for what they thought was their summer vacation. Unbeknownst to them, it'd be the last time that they ever returned to property. Imagine the spring house, the castle, all of that sort of stuff. That whole entire side of property is going to be abandoned for the rest of what I'm telling you, all the way until we start in 2012. 1987, they end up selling their spirit division off to Jim Beam. Jim Beam holds the property. They're not doing anything other than storing barrels in the warehouse that we have here, B, where we're going to, and then of course across the way, where you guys might have parked, was housed to 2 warehouses that they were using as well. Eventually, come 2005, National decides that they don't want the property anymore. Jim Beam doesn't really have a use for storage out here anymore, and so they eventually sell the property to a salvage reclamation company. That salvage reclamation company is out here looking for bricking, copper piping, like the limestone, all of that stuff for the upscale housing market. So that goes on all the way up until 2008, right before they set their eyes on the limestone castle. And then we all know what happens in 2008, right? They take that as a sign to leave. They hightail it out of here, leaving the property abandoned once more. Passes hands another time or two, but nothing super major is going on. We start in 2012, our founder, Will Arvin, sitting on our local racetrack, Keeneland, up in Lexington, Kentucky, sipping on a nice glass of bourbon, watching the horses go by, having what he would only he himself would call a midlife crisis. He sits down, he looks at the glass of bourbon, he's thinking he wants another passion, not just another, another career, something else to be passionate about and move forward with. So he does what any good old Kentucky boy would ever do, goes home, Googles distilleries for sale near me. This is the only one that pops up. So they come out, look at the property in 2012 for the first time. As you can see, buildings look like this, complete abandoned. But as he's looking around, he's walking through the rubble, Will sees the vision that Taylor had and knows he wants to bring this place back to life. And so that's exactly what he does. So they go home after a little bit of talking, convincing, and finding a business partner. They eventually come back in 2014 to purchase the property, and that's when the ball starts rolling. 2014, we start our restoration process. 16, fill our first barrel. 18, we open to the public. 2020, release our first aged spirit. That's gonna be our restoration rye. In 2022, release our first bourbon. These are the remains of Taylor's original bottling hall. So you can see the big glass windows. It was said that inside the walls were painted white, had a beautiful glass atrium roof over top. It said the employees wore kind of starch white clothes like your shirt. And we like to say E.H. Taylor's putting the med in medicinal whiskey because it almost had a sort of hospital-esque vibe. But that works to his advantage because if you know anything about Taylor, he was very, not just the hospitality guy, but he was persistent on making a better bourbon. Because we all know back then, bourbon was cut with formaldehyde to give it a kick, prune juice, tobacco spit, anything to give it a little bit of color, a little bit of kick, that sort of thing. So it makes sense that he had these big windows in his bottling hall on the path that train took into his distillery so that people could drive by or come in on that train, look outside and see the bottling and see that he was clean practice, that sort of thing as they came in.
It was a sign of quality.
Exactly, because you got to imagine, that warehouse wasn't there until 1950. But when Taylor had the place, you got the bottling hall, 2 sunken gardens on either side. You would see the castle, and then eventually the train would stop at Taylorton Station. You'd get off, you'd get the pint, you'd say join the party. So you can only imagine what kind of anticipation was building up for these guys as you're cruising in on that train. I think that's super neat. This is one of the remains of another warehouse that they had on site at one point in time. The only reason that is pummeled over is because there was a really, really bad snowstorm during the, a couple years back. and the weight of all that snow on that warehouse just crumbled.
As long as y'all don't like kill me on the pours, if we go okay, everybody can pour. Does that work? It's like taking a straw and taking a sip of someone's drink. You just like put pressure on that, draw it out.
Where do I go?
Oh, we got
Where do
it. Anybody have any guesses of what kind of bourbon they think this might be?
It does taste like a high rye.
I'm picking up like a weeded, more of a sweet.
There's a funk on it though, you're right.
It's a weedy bourbon.
Does it have any rye in it?
10% wheat, 73% white corn.
It's got a little more spiciness on it than I would expect from a weeded bourbon.
A lot of folks say misidentify it as a rye, which is not off. To be honest, it has a lot of rye characteristics, especially on the mid palate. But I think it's a lot of that oak spice.
Why is it singled out by itself? Is it just for drinking? Is this just the drinking barrel?
It's that damn good. So I'll tell you something. So initially we had the predecessor to this show barrel or like call it like an industry thief barrel. The very first one that we put aside that was wheat was actually put aside because they felt like it was off profile, which is not a negative connotation. It's just for the blend. Maybe it was just a little too wild or a little too whatever. But I really appreciated it. But it started getting really tannic towards the end when they swapped this out. I hadn't been here for a couple weeks because I was on the road. I like literally went to John, the National Sales Rep. I was like, man, that barrel turned a corner this summer. Like it came out of spring and it is sweet. I was like, wow, it's crazy. He's like, it's a new barrel. I was like, oh. But this is leaps and bounds, like way more dynamic, way more sweet than the previous one we had.
I need to go back to it. It definitely had a little weeded funk up front, but the spiciness threw me off.
All throughout summer, because I didn't know.
I think that weeded funkiness is like a dusty oak, and I took the barrel spiciness as a rye. These barrels, I know they're 6 years old, but most rick houses, they're just not that brown. I guess that's just the fungus. Like it's just a lot of evaporation in here, or a lot of angel share.
So like these are May 31st, 21. Super new, but they've got that like sort of fungus on them.
Probably just 100 years of fungus in this building attaching to them really quickly.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like we know that this is the longest of its kind. Not largest, but longest.
Definitely feels like the longest.
Oh yeah. Like
I don't think I've seen one this long.
I was like, I can't tell if we've been through like a length of a warehouse already or not yet.
This is the middle point right here.
I think it was more than
Yeah.
Nah, we've gone too far. You're right.
That's insane though.
It's nuts.
This wire. We all know what this is, right? Warehouses are two separate structures, right? So you have the frame, or essentially the exterior of the warehouse, and then you have the ricking that is separate from the building itself. When you do that, obviously if the ricking inside starts to shift the slightest bit, then you have a problem. Barrels are rolling off, structures off, that sort of thing. So you run a plumb bob from the very, very top of the warehouse all the way down to the very bottom. There's a little pad with little rings on it. If that swings any sort of way, it sets off every alarm known to man. The warehouse is shifting, and then you're at risk of the whole thing collapsing.
So if you just push this wire, all the alarms go off.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Let's not.
They shouldn't put it so close, like within arm's reach here.
But you have to be able to get to read it. You know what I mean? Like you have to be able to see it to read it. And if it's all the way out in the middle,
That's tempting. Very, very tempting.
When I see something that I like, I got it.
we've got, what do we got? Batch 4 of 23, batch 4 of 23, and probably 2 of 23. Yeah. So you got your Restoration Rye, and then you've got your Castle and Key flagship. Is there one that you guys would like to try?
The bourbon, for sure, yes.
Forgive me. What you guys are trying there, though, is batch 4 of 2023. In front of every bottle, you have the gold plate that tells you what year it was bottled, right? Beautiful gold plate. You can tell that this is 2023. Flip it over to the back. You have all the fun little statistics that everybody likes to talk about. But here at Castle and Key, we do small batches, right? But some of those big distilleries that have a bottle that tastes the exact same every single time is really kind of, it's one of those things of like, you love it, you're so-so, you can't stand it, and you had it one time, you had too much of it, now you can't even stand the smell of it, right? Those of you that have bad experiences with it or didn't like it, you know, you're less open to coming back to it and trying that bottle again. Whereas with Castle and Key, each batch has a different flavor. That's one of my favorite things about our small batches is they're so diverse, so mixed. Every single one is going to be completely different. With the Restoration Rye, my personal favorite's batch 2 of 2023. Because I love it so much, I've got 6 of these guys at the house because that may be the last time that they release that profile of batch 2 of 2023's Restoration Rye.
Their rye was very rye. The last one I had, very rye forward.
Do you know which one you had?
I have no idea.
Scared of it.
You seem very fearful. It's okay, man. It's not gonna hurt you.
I don't like it.
This is genuinely one of my favorites, solely because it's such a mild rye.
I thought I'd had this rye, but I remember it being very rye forward. That's much less rye forward than I remember.
See? Very sweet, very mellow, not very harsh or intimidating on the palate by any means.
You might actually like it. Are you trying it? What do you think?
You're right.
This is the interesting lesson here. And I've learned this one the hard way, and I know a lot of y'all give me a hard time about some of this in the comments. Anytime I say I don't like a particular whiskey, type of whiskey, finish of whiskey, it's usually because I haven't found a good one yet. There's a lot of different things out there. There's a lot of ryes out there. Keep trying stuff, because sooner or later, you're gonna find somebody that does it, I'll say right, but honestly, it's right to your palate. Now you're gonna have to try all the ryes.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. I get it. I'm done with the lecture now. You guys don't have to lecture me anymore. I'll drink rye.
Look down the way. See the yellow lettering on the side of the building?
Oh yeah.
That's what I was talking about upstairs, where T.E.H. Taylor put his name on the side of that warehouse on the path that the train took into property, almost making it like a billboard to show what he had going on.
So the train's gonna run right by here?
Train's coming right through here, passes this warehouse, passes the Sunken Gardens, passes the bottling hall, the castle. You get off at Taylorton Station, greeted with a pint of whiskey. Come join the party at the Spring House. So we all know small batches by no means like a legal defining term in the industry. Small batches for some of those big distilleries can be hundreds to thousands of barrels. Here at Castle and Key, I always like to say that we're putting the small back in small batch. Our small batches are anywhere between 10 to 140 max, truly making it an actual small batch, you know?
What are you typically distilling to proof-wise?
When it comes off that column still, 125. And then we send it to the doubler, and it's coming off that doublers, the kind of Brillo pads that act as, you know, clean that distillate. It's coming off at 135.
So you distill to 135, and then what was your barrel entry?
I believe it's 120, 115, somewhere in that ballpark.
Where did the name Castle and Key come from?
Castle, from the Scottish style castle that Taylor built. Built the castle thinking that people would want to come drink bourbon in a castle, right? Simple as that. And then the Spring House, if you notice, when you look down the way, it's in the shape of a keyhole. The reason E.H. Taylor did that is because he thought the key to his good bourbon was his limestone-rich water. And then super neat, but if you ever look at the logo, when we get back to the Spring House, we'll point it out. The C is obviously like the end of the warehouse, or the Spring House, the bold part. But the way the stairs go down on the side makes the K for our Castle and Key. But the Sunken Gardens were modeled after those in Windsor Palace in England. But he built the gardens inspired by German beer gardens, thinking people could come and do the same thing, but with bourbon instead of beer. I think one of my favorite pieces, though, of the Sunken Garden has got to be this back wall. Those look like trees, right? They're actually Texas yew bushes that have been left unattended for 30, 40 plus years. A man named John Karloftis, a master garden designer out of Lexington, Kentucky, came down, put the beautiful white hydrangeas on the back wall, trimmed those Texas yew bushes out from the middle instead of cutting them back down to knee height. And now we underlight them, and they make this sort of beautiful frame with the Texas yew bushes on the back, the white hydrangeas on the other side. Everything you guys are looking at, though, is completely original, from the limestone to the etching, the floors, all of that fun stuff inside. The only thing that's not original, oddly enough, is that Castle and Key logo up there. Taylor was kind enough to build us a castle and a key-shaped spring house, but he didn't put our logo up there a couple hundred years ago, you know? So we know that the castle is original from Taylor, but the equipment inside, from the 4 grain bins to the scale hoppers and the fermentation tanks, are left over from National Distillers' time here in 1935. We know the grain bins hold our 4 grains, corn, wheat, malted barley, and our rye. They then drop down a floor below to the blue device, which it's our roller mill, kind of acts like a giant rolling pin to crush up those grains. They then send that grain to the scale hopper over here, acts as like a giant measuring cup. Right before we drop it down a floor below to the cookers, cook it, cool it, send it through a channel of tubes and stuff like that, pipes and stuff to cool it down, and then we take it to the tanks over here. We have 15 open air tanks like this in this room, all of which are in that 11 to 10, 5,000 gallon range, 11,150. So after we've hit that day 4, right, in the fermentation tank, we'll then send it in here to our column still. I mean, you can see just how massive that still is.
Now, this is the original still?
This is one we had to put in. Okay. Yeah, so the grain bins, scale hoppers, fermentation tanks, that's all original from National Distillers. When we came in, we had to add the still. But we send that mash 3.5, 4 stories up. That mash, using gravity, will make its way down to the bottom, falling through those perforated plates, sort of acting as kind of sieves or filters to catch that mash. Meanwhile, you can kind of feel the heat from here. We're adding steam from the bottom, taking that alcohol away from those solids to the top, and the solids are falling down to the bottom. It goes in at 8% or 8 proof from those tanks to here. It comes off at 125 proof as low wine. So once it comes off that column still at 125, technically you could send it to the barrel. We don't think that it's ready just yet. We send it to these doublers, which sort of act as kind of Brillo pads to clean that distillate just a little bit further. Remove any other impurities, bitterness, that sort of thing out of the distillate. It'll come off of these doublers, at 135 proof, and then at that point, we consider it ready to be barreled and sent to the warehouse if we're gonna be making an aged spirit. But say we're gonna make a gin, or say we're gonna make a vodka, because we have a great gin portfolio and a great vodka portfolio. We're gonna send it in here to our gin still room. It's gonna run through the column still. It's gonna come off at 191 proof. Say we're making vodka. We're using that bourbon mash or that bourbon distillate to make that vodka.
So you distill it through that, and then you just run that in here. Okay, that 135 proof, and take the proof up.
Yep, take it up to 191. At that point, it's colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Meets all the criteria to be considered a vodka. And we send it down to bottling. They'll slap a label on it, proof it down a little bit to that 80-90, call it our Sacred Spring vodka. Say we're making a gin. We're gonna take the same process using the rye distillate. Send it up, 150 or 191, except we're gonna proof it back down to 150, 160 in that ballpark. We then send it to what is called a gin basket up there, about yay tall. Little cylinder filled with your herbs, your botanicals, and your juniper, that sort of thing. Sending that vapor through those gin baskets is gonna collect the essence of all those botanicals. My favorite thing about the gin and the vodka process though, is that you can take that bourbon distillate, get it to 150, 160 in vapor form, send it through that basket, but if there's no juniper in that basket, there's no gin. You know what I mean? You've just made a like a botanically flavored vodka. I think the saying goes, no juniper, no gin. Kind of looks like a little blueberry in there. The darker blue pieces.
Had a great time on the tour here at Castle and Key. So much freaking history here. Really cool to see the old way of doing things. Obviously, some things have been updated and modernized a little bit, but in general, making whiskey a lot like they were doing it 100 years ago. We were at Bardstown this morning. Just the contrast between the brand new, built for scale, modern facility and this more old school facility with the old boiler room here and everything. The contrast is stark. Appreciate Tyler, our tour guide, for setting up and getting us this VIP experience. Your tour, if you come here, will be a good bit different than this one, although I think you'll see a lot of the same things. Probably won't randomly bump into people and get to test some single barrels, but overall, definitely a tour worth coming to here at Castle and Key. You might recognize Tyler from the Buffalo Trace video we did last year. I think it may have been our first barrel pick video. Swung through Buffalo Trace. He was working there in the gift shop. First person actually to ask me for an autographed bottle, which was kind of crazy. I think I ended up buying the bottle to give to him, which I don't think that's how that's supposed to work, but I bought him a bottle, signed it, and then gave it to him. Thoughts for the day here, really, it's just tradition. You know, maybe we can learn from folks here that are doing it the traditional way and adapt that and try to build our own way as we start doing our own thing. So I appreciate y'all watching all the way to the end. Hit me with a bottle kill down in the chat. We'll see y'all in the next one.